Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar. Just as by way of introduction, my name is Oliver Crofton. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Continual. This is not a sales session. This is a very much an informative discussion around a particular topic of the webinar that we've outlined for today. But just to let you know, if you're not aware of who Continual are, we are a speak up platform designed as a technology solution that prompts and supports timely nudges to encourage people to speak up and report wrongdoing and business issues. And this service is very unique in the way that we have designed it to be incredibly user-friendly and remove the friction for people reporting things. So if you do want more information, please contact me. I'll reach out to a member of the team after this session. My guest today, I'm really delighted to have join me in this discussion. He's a veteran of the GRC sector, having worked in the police, at government level, and then through to the private sector across very large organisations, and has a really esteemed and interesting career across the GRC and investigation sector. So before we get started, Peter, could you introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background about your experience, and how long investigations have been part of your career?
Yeah, no problem at all. It's lovely to be here and speaking to you all. So I started my career many, many years ago. I think it was back in 2004. I joined the police and I stayed in the police for about 12 years. And that was Hampshire Constabulary, the Metropolitan Police, and ended my career in the City of London Police. During my time there, I think I've investigated almost most criminal crimes you can come across, or been part of operations that have, with a main focus early on. It was in child abuse, child sexual exploitation, quite harrowing but rewarding stuff. And then I moved into the City of London, who were the lead force for fraud in the UK, and handle very serious matters that don't quite meet the threshold for the serious fraud office. Due to a number of reasons, and I won't get political, I chose to leave the police and move into the corporate sector. Tried my hand briefly at Lloyds Banking Group, but found that KYC, CDD, know your customer within financial institutes wasn't quite for me. I went back into investigations with BP, where I spent time as an investigations manager in the EMEA region, looking at bribery, frauds, developing investigation teams, and a fantastic role. I took a short break and went into the serious fraud office because I wanted to understand how our enforcement agency works and how they investigate. So I did a few months on a contract role there, really informative and insightful, before moving into broader compliance within Inmarsat, which is now Viasat, which is a satellite communications company in 41 countries with a lot of military contracts, government contracts. And then took over as head of compliance in Kingfisher. Most of my time there was on the whistleblowing program, building the capability, the standardizations, and really looking after those reporters. And then I've taken the jump and branched out on my own and started a consultancy firm, mainly aiming at those smaller businesses that don't have the in-house capability for compliance and investigations.
Great. Well, I mean, that's a huge spectrum of organisations that you've worked across, Peter. That's really fascinating. I'd like to delve into that a bit. But um, obviously, the subject today is around how the tables have turned when you were investigated.
Yeah.
And I appreciate some of the information is sensitive. You won't be able to go into it. But I'd like to get just an understanding to start off with is what your mindset was like about investigations before you were personally involved in them. So some of the way that you approached investigations prior to you being investigated. What were your what were your main thoughts, and how your mindset was prior to you being investigated?
I think before being investigated, my mindset was very much on the focus of starting an investigation from a position of no wrongdoing has occurred. So I approached it, and each and every person I was speaking to, as though they haven't done anything wrong until the facts are there that change that opinion. And each and every person that you speak to is given that opportunity to give their account, defend themselves. But what I didn't give much thought to at the time was, how is my investigation impacting them? Um, what happens to them in the interim period? What are they thinking about? What can I do to help that? Because my focus was on getting the investigation done, getting that report finalized, and getting the answers up to the more senior management. So that was the driver behind it. It was still to treat people fairly, but I didn't go into the human emotions behind it. The one caveat with that would have been, if I knew the subject of the investigation was going to be suspended, then there would be pre-arrangements with HR to be involved and to be waiting. But then I would hand over to HR to handle the employee side of things. So it very was much on the side of, this is my investigation, this has to be conducted. Didn't focus so much on the empathic side of things, the emotion side of things, which did change later on.
And do you think that that mantra of there hasn't been any wrongdoing until the facts are collated that indicate otherwise is standard across investigations? Or do you think you built that process because of your training in the police and built it over time? Because quite often people that are running investigations in certainly in mid to smaller size organizations, that's not their day job. You know, they not necessarily experiencing that. So how do you think your approach marries in with the norm?
I think it is the norm now.
Hmm.
Going back some years, potentially it wasn't. And I think my view changed from the police. In the police, it was very much, if you're in front of me, I've pretty much made a judgment. Because if I've managed to get to that arrest stage, I've got pretty good evidence to probably suggest you have done it or you haven't, or you're well known to me, because you get lots of repeat offenders. So the corporate world, I've always said, is investigation being conducted with one arm tied behind your back because of the access to information you have. But I really had to step back, soften myself for internal investigations in the corporate world,
Hmm.
because you can't be as, not necessarily as direct, you can't be as forceful as and impactful as you can in the police. So certainly that stance of, you have to start from no wrongdoing. I think sometimes people do take their biases and their pre-formed opinions into the interview room with them, or when they've picked up a case, they make those assumptions straight away. This person's only doing it for X, Y, and Z. This is the rationale behind it. And you do have to train your mindset. So, well, no, we don't know.
Hmm.
And you're not going to know. You just talk to them as an individual. Unless you've got evidence to the otherwise, you can't make that assumption. Because you start bringing assumption into the investigation, and that's when it starts becoming flawed.
Hmm. Hmm. Going back just again prior to your shift from being investigated, what did you believe you understood well about how investigations affect people that changed?
I had an understanding from the police based on the severity of the case. If I was interviewing somebody for shoplifting, I would give very little mind to the emotional impact of that, because the outcome of it isn't likely to be that significant.
Hmm.
If, however, I'm interviewing somebody for, say, child sex offences, then I know that is a massive impact, especially if they are innocent and it is a false allegation.
Hmm.
People being arrested for these types of offences, being put on bail for extremely long periods,
Hmm.
not knowing what's going to happen, is horrendous. But even then, in the police, I don't think our victim care or witness care was sufficient.
Hmm.
You just let them go, forget about them, conduct your investigation. So I was more mindful coming into the corporate world that when I do start that investigation, it is paramount. It moves with pace,
Mm, mm,
because even witnesses, when you speak to them, they're going to be left wondering what's happened. Was the information I used useful? What's going to be the result of this? So you do have to move at some pace. And I did learn very early on that communication is the key. You've got to keep that communication flowing.
mm,
Um, Leaving people in the dark doesn't help things, and it leaves people to stew with their
mm,
emotions, with their feelings.
mm,
Um, so I had to bring that in, and also take into account that when you're dealing with career criminals, well, they tend not to care so much what the outcome is.
mm,
Even some would say, even if I go back to prison, that's fine.
mm,
When it's somebody's job on the line,
mm,
most people are only a few paychecks away from not being able to pay the mortgage, the
mm,
bills, perhaps not even telling the family what's happening.
mm.
So I became much more conscious of that even the small grievance matters can have that much bigger impact on somebody.
Yeah, yeah. So moving to the point when everything changed and you became under investigation, can you take us back to the moment you realised that you were going to be the subject of an investigation?
I can. I remember it vividly. Um, Coming into work, settling down, chatting to my colleague. Um, Now we both had a meeting with my manager in question, um, and asked if we could change them. Um, and at that point, my manager at the time was very snappy, which was unusual. Refused to change, and we all thought that was odd. And I go into the meeting with him, and immediately it turns into an interrogation, or what I felt was an interrogation of questions about a certain incident that had occurred with me and a colleague. And that put me straight onto the back foot. Um, and it followed up with straight away with, give me your laptop, give me your phone, you're being suspended whilst we investigate this. So within the space of a couple of hours of coming into work, I'd had my equipment taken. I'd been told not to contact anyone in the business, not to contact my colleague, and was escorted from the building. Um, and even then, the questions that were thrown at me, I thought, why? What's going on? Why is this occurring? Because the incident in question, I didn't think there was anything wrong. And so that was when I knew it was all going to kick off.
Mm. Can I ask what was your immediate emotional reaction as a human being, not as an
Yeah.
investigator? So there's two sides of this. One of them is understanding because you've also got insights in terms of the investigation process, but
Mm.
putting that to one side for just a moment. What about your emotional reaction?
Emotionally, it was, I say the first ones would be shock, fear, and anxiety. Um, Not understanding where the concern had come from, shocked at how the initial treatment had taken place, knowing that if I'd have approached somebody like that for one of my investigations, there would probably be a complaint raised against me on that basis.
Mm,
Um, and just that overall sort of, what now?
mm,
What is going to happen? I was back in that position thinking, is this going to go to the nth degree? Am I going to lose my job? I don't have those sort of savings. So it was fear, anxiety, shock, which trickled into resentment and anger very
mm,
quickly.
mm. And do you think your professional knowledge made that moment easier or harder?
I think at that specific instant, it didn't help at all. I think I was caught so much on the back foot
Mm,
that actually my initial reactions clouded my professional judgment
mhm,
and my professional ability. Looking back, had I just sort of gone, well, stop, and taken some time to settle myself, I probably would have started off in a stronger foot.
Mm. Mhm. Um, could you just give us an outline on what surprised you most about those first few days in going through that process?
What surprised me most was the the lack of contact, the isolation, um, taking everything off of me, telling me not to contact anyone. Um, Admittedly, the first person I picked up the phone to was my colleague, and we were straight together chatting about what had just happened because, unbeknownst to me, at the same time I was taken into a room, so was she, and dismissed or suspended. Um, and then what surprised me, as I know I've mentioned it already, was the lack of contact.
Mm.
I heard nothing for 3 weeks
Right.
from the business, from anyone. So there I was. I would like to say I was sat at home twiddling my thumbs. I wasn't. I was out socializing and doing things. It's amazing how much you can fill your time. Um, but there was no contact. So I had no idea what was going on. And I had no method to contact anybody. The isolation was what shocked me.
And is that from the investigations you've undertaken? Is that normal?
Am I guilty of doing the same? I reckon I probably was before then. Um, because you're never dealing with one investigation at a time.
Mhm.
You're never dealing with just investigations. So have I probably had somebody suspended and then forgotten to contact them? Yeah, I'm going to hold my hand up and say probably. Obviously, I've learned from this,
Mm.
but then I also reflect on the fact, is it the investigator's role to do that?
Mm.
Should HR, ER have been the ones reaching out to me or reaching out to the investigator to say what's going on? Can we have feedback? Can we at least let them know that it's
Mm.
progressing? I take it on myself now. And if somebody has been suspended, I will make sure I drop them a note every few days,
Mm.
or at least their employee representative to say, look, this is ongoing. This is still
Mhm.
going on. You're not forgotten about. Um, these are the likely timescales,
Mhm.
because the not knowing is the worst.
Mm. And that's not driven by anything that's best practice or even legal requirements, is it? That you it's not like there's a silence or lack of information from a employment law perspective, is it?
Not that I'm aware, no. Obviously, you've got the EU whistleblowing directive, which
Mm.
tells you when and how you've got to update the reporter of a concern,
Mm.
but there's no such protections put on the subject of a concern. Now, who is facing more anxiety and stress, a reporter or the subject? Obviously, if the subject is guilty and they know they're guilty, you could argue they've brought it on themselves. But for those people that aren't or might not be, I would say they're probably in a more emotional, emotive state, a more precarious state, depending on the concern, than somebody who's raised a whistleblowing concern.
Mm.
If it's not a very like aggrievement harassment one, if they're just saying, oh, I think they're pinching off the company, then the reporter's not at stake. Um, so I think perhaps we do need to look at that. Should there be protections on subjects of investigations? Touch wood, it's never happened in my corporate career, but in my policing career, I have had subjects commit suicide, fearing the worst outcome.
I mean that obviously some of the stuff we're talking about today is uh, incredibly sensitive. And that, I think, guess that puts it in perspective, the emotional impact that, being a subject, as you phrase it, um, of an investigation is as impactful and
Mm,
um, affects people as much as being the reporter.
mm,
And that's something we don't really consider. Certainly as a layman in this
mm,
scenario, that you're looking in and you think, well, there's almost that mentality: is no smoke without fire, or
yeah.
that whole there's lots of different cliches about it, but there's an investigation, there's been a report, this needs to be looked at, and all of the
Mm.
focus is often on the reporter, and not given to the subject. Um, what happened after the 3 weeks of silence?
I was eventually contacted, and I was invited to be interviewed. I attended the interview. Now, at that stage, obviously, I'd gotten my head around some things, and I was far more prepared. Um, and so, one of my first opening gambits to the interviewer was, "Am I the subject of this investigation?" And the answer was no, which that shocked me even more, because I asked, how do you view me? And they said, "Oh, we're viewing you now as a witness."
Right.
And I'm like, "So you've taken it upon yourself to suspend a witness?"
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
I have never suspended a witness. Whether or not the termination had been a knee jerk, the suspension had been a knee jerk reaction, and then hard to pull back from. Um, but we went through the entire interview process. I think with me asking as many questions as I was being asked at that point, and then obviously left the room. And then that was it for 2 weeks. Again, radio silence.
Right.
And after the 2 weeks, I was then asked to come back to work.
Right. Okay. There's a lot to unpick there. Um, okay, well, just continuing the process, then we can maybe come
Mm,
back and delve a bit more into emotions and some of the more some of the aspects of the process. But so after 2 weeks, another 2 weeks of silence, you go back to work, and then were you expected to go back to your job as normal? Was there a sort of a reintegration process? Was there, like, how did the company
yeah.
handle bringing you back into the fold, where 5 weeks prior to that you were being
Mm,
suspended, which is obviously a huge
yeah.
a
It,
huge
it it's a big step to take if you're going to do it against somebody, I believe.
mm,
Um, and for me, it's always a last resort.
mm,
But going back in, I think they probably would have expected me just to go back in as normal. Um, but being me and some of the experiences I've had, I said, well, okay, can we have a chat about the process that's taken place,
mm,
and how I felt this
mm,
has gone? Um, so we did have a good dialogue with HR and with line manager to say, sort of like, this is how I felt. This is what I felt was unjustified.
mm,
There was no contact. How does you think it made me feel? So we did have a good reintegration conversation.
mm,
And I think lessons learned all round, um, which I suppose is a very good plus of a business that can do that, and take that on board, um, from the situation, which perhaps was one they haven't encountered before or haven't taken those steps before. Uh, so I don't think they're, although at the time I thought it was malicious, um, I don't think there was malice behind it.
what were the motivations, do you think? Do you think it was because of your position and there was an overreaction on the fact that they didn't expect it for you to be involved in something like this?
I
What
think
were the
so.
motivations?
I think it was the fact that it was the position in the company, potentially haven't had two people implicated before, didn't quite know how best to handle it. So they went for almost like the nuclear option. Perhaps it was the safeguarding. Um, what I don't know is whether any of it was from legal advice for external counsel to say this is how you should approach it. Um, but I think, yeah, it was just a situation that potentially hadn't arisen before with the people who were involved. Um, and they just went down the slightly stronger route at the time.
Well, I mean, that's one way of putting it. Yeah, very diplomatically. But so how did being investigated change the way you saw the organization and the leadership at the time?
At the time, during, very disgruntled, very dissatisfied. Um, but because I don't think it was followed how I would have followed it had I picked up an investigation like that. Um, I think it could have been handled more sensitively. I think it could have been handled more empathetically. Um, and that's why I'm glad there were learnings from it. And hopefully, if that situation were to arise again, it would be dealt with differently. The biggest impact was on, as I said, on me and how I then handled people involved in my investigations moving forward.
Mm,
Um, so for as much as I look back at it and at the time still have mixed feelings, actually it was a fantastic learning experience. Not one I'd want people to go through.
no.
Um, but if you can take away from me saying, speak to everybody, keep in contact with people involved in the investigation, um, because you don't know what their situation is outside.
Mm,
You don't know what other personal impacts they're going through.
mm,
And we're all human,
mm,
regardless of, even if I had, I don't know, I started embezzling millions of pounds from the business. Um, that may make me criminal, but I'm still a human
mm.
with emotions to be taken into account.
Yeah, yeah. That gives us a good segue to just to look at, okay, after going through this, what fundamentally changed in how you approach investigations?
One is my approach to people in the investigation. Um, I am always quite clear and explicit what their role is for me.
Mm,
Um, if I'm contacting somebody who is the subject of an investigation, I will tell them, you are the subject of an investigation. I need to talk to you. I need to get your account. Um, but I will also remind them that just because they are the subject of investigation, my investigations come from a place of there's been no wrongdoing unless there is evidence that there has been. And that I need to give you, the subject, the opportunity to provide your account of matters, your expertise. And I will reiterate that in the interview with them. I will make sure, much like the police, which I'd forgotten about, that I set enough time for the interview. That it's comfortable. There's water. They're away from prying eyes.
mm,
Um, everything to try and reduce the emotional state they may be in
mm,
um, as best as I possibly can,
mm,
and to be as open with them as the investigation allows me to be.
mm, mm. How has your communication style um, with subjects changed following your experience?
Yeah, I now treat them as the same as a reporter or
Good.
a witness. Um, obviously, if I know by the time I get round to them that they have done it, perhaps I've got irrefutable evidence, then I might be a little more direct. But I still know that that person is a person. I don't know what they're going through that may have triggered them to do whatever they've done.
Mhm.
Um, because I never want to be that person that tips them over the edge.
Mhm.
If I feel that, yes, they have done something wrong, yes, it is likely to lead to dismissal, then I 100% will be, how can we support them? HR, what is there outside of here? Is there an employee engagement forum we can put them to? How can we signpost them to other things? Because yes, we don't want fraudsters and whatnot in the company, but they may be married with children and the breadwinner's about to lose their job. And that's a horrendous place to be in. I'm not that much of a monster to not have that thought now in my head.
Mhm. I guess that's another question to look at is how do you balance the rigor and fairness with empathy and humanity, right? How do you balance the what you need to do by the book with the reality of somebody is perhaps going through a
Mhm.
terrible time in their personal life. It's driven them to do things that they wouldn't perhaps normally have done. Um, and yet that, there's so many cases where fraud has been committed. And if you dig a layer below the headline, actually, there's a weird to say it, but there's a there's a almost a justification for why they've done this. Is not to feather their own nest, it's to support family or crisis at home. How do you balance that now that you've seen both sides?
I am there to protect the business, first
Mhm.
and foremost. I'm there to get to the bottom of allegations and identify whether they have or have not occurred. Now, I will do that. I will stick to our policies, our processes, and procedures. Because for me, empathy, fairness, um, doesn't impact or contradict evidence. They either have or haven't done something.
Mhm.
Um, Now, for me, as an investigator, my role stops there.
Mhm.
Um, I can suggest an outcome and potentially say, well, your options are here, training up to dismissal. I think then, and some people say it's a little bit of a cop out, but I don't like to be the judge and jury. It's for management, it's for human relations to take into account circumstances and what they feel the consequences should be. Um, I'm not there for that. I'm simply there to put it to them that it has occurred. But certainly, I will ask about motivation in an interview
Well,
because I think a person's state of mind is important. And depending on the severity, I do believe in second chances if you can.
interesting. So are there questions now that you ask as an investigator that you didn't used to?
Uh, Probably not, no, um, because I've always been curious as to the why.
Yeah.
Certainly in policing, the mindset is crucial to the points to prove for some crimes. The fact that
Mhm.
they've done it, you have to know the motivation. And I can say, for instance, if somebody stabs somebody and they die, well, it's only murder if they set out to kill them and their mindset was to kill. And that's why you've got manslaughter or GBH with intent. Um, so mindset has always been important. But I think perhaps some investigators that haven't had that experience may not think to ask, why did you do it?
Mhm.
What's going on? Is there anything you need to tell me that's triggered this?
Um, for HR leaders, legal compliance, what are the biggest blind? What's the biggest blind spot that you think we have about investigations? Is it the motivation, or is it other aspects that aren't looked at enough?
I think it is potentially the motivation. I think we possibly downplay a lot of them to, oh, it's just he said, she said, it's a grievance. It's them. They're just not happy. They're being pushed too hard. They don't like to work. Um, I think sometimes we do fail to get to the bottom of what's actually happening and why.
Hmm.
And that, I fear, sometimes is reflected when you get multiple concerns over a period of time raised within, say, the same business area or about the same person. And you've got to start looking back saying, well, if this is coming up time and time again, how were the previous investigations conducted? What was done? How was it handled? I also find that there's a resilience to having an independent investigation function. And we rely on people within the business to do these investigations that potentially haven't had thorough training or don't have the ability to have that training
Hmm.
to truly get to the bottom of it. It all comes down, unfortunately, I suppose, to budget.
Hmm.
Having a decent system in place for the management of cases. Certainly, I've worked in some businesses where we've had a case management system, but HR have been working off spreadsheets still.
Hmm.
And I kind of sort of say, well, is that really good? Should you be doing that? What about document preservation and things like that, and getting all
Hmm.
your notes within a case?
Hmm. Interesting. Taking a slight step back, what does a good investigation look and feel like from the subject side?
One that is fair, one that is transparent, one that is timely. If a subject gives you information or gives you lines of inquiry, just because they weren't on your plan, they shouldn't be ignored. One that is communicative, so they know what's going on. I think if you have those elements in place, then you're hard to go wrong. I think they will generally know, and this is one of the benefits, I suppose, of being a subject. You will know if you've done something wrong or not, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking. There are those incidents where you've perhaps done something that you didn't think was wrong,
Hmm.
but under perhaps the code of conduct or the policies, it was. So they should have an idea of where it's going, what's happened. But I feel as long as you're honest upfront with them and transparent, flip side, same with reporters. If it is a fair, transparent investigation, even if the outcome goes against what they would have liked, they should be able to accept it because it was fair, open, transparent.
Hmm.
From a victim perspective, I've had investigations that haven't gone their way that I said, sorry, but there's no evidence to say what you're saying happened. And they've thanked me because I've listened to them.
Hmm.
I've done a thorough investigation. And actually, all they wanted to do was to be listened to.
Hmm.
And I think when a subject is giving their account, listen to it. Um, and at least maybe try and put yourself in their steps and understand from their point of view.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, very valuable feedback, interesting points you've made there. I think Going into a little bit more about your experience, if we can, before we
Mm.
wrap up. I'm conscious of time. We're going to try and finish it at the 45-minute mark. Um, Going through this experience, what did you learn about yourself?
I learned I can handle not being employed quite well, that I can fill my time.
Yeah,
I
so
also
pretty so
learned
for life.
that um, actually I'm fairly resilient, um, because being able to sort of step back into that environment and then have those sensible discussions and carry on, um, I think shows the company in a good light, and I think it shows that actually I can take that hit, carry on, um, and get over it and evolve myself. I think I've learned to be more empathetic, and I've learned to embrace that it doesn't matter the severity of an investigation. From my point of view, it can be the smallest in the world, but it can impact that person or multiple people in a far bigger way than a multi-billion-pound fraud scam against the whole company, because that tends not to infect the individual.
Mm,
So I've learned that it's the individual that matters, and my job, I said earlier, I'm there to protect the business. I've kind of switched a bit now. Uh, I'm there to be a voice for the people in the business. I'm there to be a listening board, um, for them. And if I can give them a voice and do right by them, I think that's doing right by the business.
mm, mhm. Interesting. Has it changed how you think about fairness and justice more broadly at work?
Yeah, I think it has. I think fairness extends to subjects,
Mhm,
where perhaps I may not have been that way inclined previously. Um, and I think it shows me that from it, a company is they're willing to learn from their mistakes, then actually that's a good indication to me that they're, because all the companies have their values, um, but they're not often proven to be living by them.
mhm,
And I think that incident that happened showed me that actually companies can, and they can make positive changes that reflect that.
mhm, mhm. I'm going to put you on the spot as we start to wrap up. What's the one message that you most want professionals running investigations to take away from your story?
Behind every investigation, there is a person. You don't know what that person is going through professionally, personally. Treat everybody with fairness, kindness, and transparency.
Right. Well, that's very sensible, pragmatic advice, and I think people should definitely take that on board. I think it's probably challenging in the what we haven't touched on today as well is the emotional uh, impact on investigators as well, right? So when you're running an investigation, we've only looked at just one side of it from the subject
Yeah.
side. Maybe a follow-up session around how to keep a cool head and be pragmatic as an investigator might be another session to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're dealing with emotive subjects that potentially you've gone through as an investigator. I liken it to
Mm,
say perhaps you're investigating sexual harassment. Maybe you've been a victim of it. Um,
mm,
Staying calm, staying cool, collected is very important. And then obviously having a debrief after, and that space to let it out with a colleague.
mm. Um, Peter, you said at the start you're branching out as a consultant. You're doing some work freelance. I think your experience would be invaluable for the people that have joined the session today. How do people reach out and leverage your experience and your expertise? How can they reach you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. If you search for Peter Spake, you'll find me. Or my company is Poseidon Compliance Consulting. It's on my LinkedIn profile. There is also a web page. You could find it through Google. Um, I'm more than happy for you, Oliver, to share my contact details as well to the audience.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Look, listen, your openness and how candid you've been is has been really insightful. I think it's
Thank
been
you.
fantastic to get another perspective that we don't often hear. And I know that, well, judging by nobody has dropped off on the session, so everybody's been fully engaged. And I can only thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I know it's something you probably don't want to relive again, but talking about it has been really insightful for us all. So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
no, it's been a pleasure. And hopefully if it helps somebody along the way, then that's always a plus for me.
Great. Thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Take care. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.